are the fireboxes that Jason and I will be modelling, and the control box next door, and there's the hydrant.
So throughout the build I'm going to be using this 030 micro strip for all of the fireboxes and the stainless steel boxes. So for the fireboxes throughout the build we will use this 71003, which is RLM 23 red. Now we're going to have to think about how we go about this. My thought process at the moment is to paint the strip and then trim off the size we want, which means we'll have a white underside which we'll have to either try and paint in or have facing down so it can't be seen. What we'll do is we'll paint a length. We've got to do 2 for this back end. We're going to use 71063 silver, which is a RLM 01 colour, for the metal boxes that are always with the fireboxes. So whilst that's drying on there, we can paint a section of the strip with this as well. It's one of the great things about acrylics is their drying time. So this will dry quickly, then we can cut it up. This paint will stay wet and we can go and touch up the various ends. Need 2. I've done 3 in case one flicks out of the tweezers. Just going to let the silver dry a little longer. So now we can just finish the job with these little red boxes. They are slightly rectangular, the boxes, they're not square. So I think that looks about right to me. So just going to place that there to dry. Let's do the next one. We've got quite a few of these to do during the course of the build. So I'm going to paint a length of this in the red now while I've got the paint out. And then we can just cut bits off as we need and as we go through the build. There you go, that will help us progress through the build at a speed. Probably need to do some more at some point, I guess, but that'll do for now. I'm not going to get rid of that paint just yet, just in case we have to do some touch up once we've installed them. Okay, I'm going to wash my brush, then we'll do the silver ones. Okay, we've cut this section off the rest of the rod, so let's cut this first one off. there, a little bit easier to see than the red ones. And now we can just touch in those cut off ends. So that's one. And same again, we might as well use the silver paint while we've got it out and do some of the silver boxes. A little difficult to do on camera. Let's try this side, might be easier. So red on the bottom. That'll do. And then silver above it, quite a bit above it, about the height of a door above it. Okay, I can do that on the other side, and whilst we're in that area we can put the missing door on. I'd forgotten there was one there, not included in the kit, but definitely you can see it on the photos, so I might as well do that at the same time. And that's sort of in the middle of that face. Like that. Okay, that's looking all right. Looks alright. Good thing about crystal clear is you can just peel it off when when it's dried, which allows me to tidy up nice and easily. Right then, we have now got the grey deck area painted. So my next task is to mask this off so that we can prime and paint in the white area. And that's only this section of the deck. The rest of the Promenade deck is painted. There's no white to be put down on here because it's all on the superstructure. So we've got the carpet painted in this area here, and then we've got the grey deck down again where we've got the little life raft pods are all mounted there. So there's no white to go on beyond this sort of area here. So what we're going to do is we're going to mask that off, and then we're going to prime it all in white. We'll paint it all in white. We'll then glaze these windows. and then we're ready to put that wood deck down once we've installed this into the hull. And then we've got a few other things to do later on. Now, most of the fittings that go on these 3 deck areas here don't go on until step 63 and 64. However, there is 2 posts which go behind the cranes here. They're just for aesthetics, as I understand it. But what I don't want to be doing is adding them on later, trying to paint them, and there's a possibility that we might need to fill a gap or something. So what I want to do is install those 2 items here now, and then they can all be painted in when we do the rest of it. So that's the plan, that's what we're going to do. So I just want to check the fit of these parts. They've not been cleaned up, just removed from the sprue. Yeah, I think it's absolutely wise to sort these out before we put them in. I need to sort out which way round they go as well. But either way, there is some filling needed to be done to make them perfectly smooth. There's also a little bit of sink in them. I don't know if you can see that distortion in the light, but just there is a little dip. So let's get these parts cleaned up and we can get them on.
Passengers walking around the wraparound promenade on deck 7 can exit the promenade at the forward end and go out to look over the forecastle area. And this area is where the spare propeller blades are situated. There are 8 of them, 2 for each of the 4 propellers, and each pair of blades is a different design, either left-handed or right-handed, and with a different design between the forward and aft propellers because of the different water flow characteristics in which they have to operate. And these spare propellers, made of stainless steel with the circular hole for the lifting point through them, make very interesting for the passengers, and in fact they've been dubbed the Commodore's cufflinks. Now, as we look out forward from this deck where the spare propeller blades are situated, we can see the end of the ship. And in fact, the bow deck or forecastle proper drops down one deck, and the structure above it forms a V-shaped breakwater. And the idea of this came from the Normandy and the France, 2 great French liners also built at Saint-Nazaire. And I refined the design for Queen Mary 2 into this V snow plough type appendage that's up there on the bow, and it was always the joke that any heavy seas that dared come up onto the forecastle would be given short shift and will be thrown instantly overboard by that great breakwater.
Okay, we have masked off the grey deck area now. What I find is that masking tape is easier to cut when you've got to be cutting around contours. So I've been using up some of my masking tape that's been previously used and has got life left in it. And then on this back end here, I've used frisket film because it's a cheaper way of covering a large area. Anyhow, we are done and ready for priming in the white once we've added these parts on. Now I'm going to add them on as next job. They still need some clean up on that sink, and then we can do any filling knowing that we're not getting dust or likely to damage the already painted decks. Okay, that sink is coming out really quite easily, so that's nice. We're not going to have to go back and do a second go with the Mr. Surfacer. Okay, that one is good and ready. And what I've also done with these is I've trimmed the peg at the bottom that's used for locating it, just in the sort of hope that that helps it sit a bit closer. It didn't look a very tight fit when we test fitted it. Okay. The fit of these is not brilliant, so there will be some filling needed to be done, as I suspected. So we'll just let that dry, and then we can go around with some filler and sand all that smooth before we prime and paint the white in.
are the life rafts, and they're davits, and these are used primarily for the crew to evacuate the ship. Notice that we have painted grey working deck here. All the davits and the life rafts. And we're moving further aft along deck 7, and you can see inside here the King's Court, the informal restaurant. You see how high the superstructure is from here, deck 7, and you can see how high we are when we look down the side of the ship. All the loading operations going on, and then moving further aft we walk past the large windows of the Princess Grill. See these screens that Jason is working hard to make more realistic and replicate. And so we're now at the aft end of deck 7, where it wraps round the stern. You see the famous staircase leading up to deck 8, and here is the children's pool area, and we see the staircase down to deck 6, which Jason has been working on with the grey working deck down below. That's where the emergency generators are stowed. And this, the children's pool, we see has been modified, in fact, from the original configuration. There are now shower units there at the platform end. The spray guns have been taken away.
Okay, before we fit the deck into the hull, I want to just look at fitting the wood deck. So I'm using wood deck that comes from Arkwalk. I'm using the Artworks deck, which is sold separately to the kit, and not the same as the Platinum Edition, although I think the general arrangement is pretty much the same. And what we need to do with this one is actually cut the deck out from its backing film, because we want to preserve all this spare wood, because we're going to use those in these rooms here. So I'm not gluing the rooms in at this stage, but what I do want to do is just make sure that when we fit the wooden deck that we are buttoning it up correctly and we're not leaving gaps that are going to be seen. So the first job is with a sharp knife just to start cutting out the deck with the backing material still on it, and then we'll take the backing material off only when we've finished test fitting. So right now that is where I am. I'm just starting to remove this. So I'll get all these removed from the film, and then we can have a look at how we are going to start fitting this. It's really important that you take your time and go around the shape really carefully, it's quite a thick backing material, so just keep checking, making sure that you've cut through it properly. There we go. And there's some, you want to be careful you don't damage the deck as well, because there's some tight little shapes in here which be easy to just cut a corner off if you're not careful. So use a magnifying glass if you need to. So when we come to fit the wooden deck, we have a number of gaps that are supposed to be there, and we need to make sure that we do that correctly. So key areas are that it fits around the bit of deck here that has the life rafts and bits and pieces on, and also that it fits around the main bulkhead here and these little sort of bay window areas. So we can't butt it up to the raised areas, as it'll be too close and this won't go in. If you don't have this in when you're putting the wooden decks on, it is possible to get the deck too close. Now you'll also notice that there is a gap at the outside edge of the deck here, and that's for where the original plastic railings would have gone. And when we put our railings on and we paint all that in, it's going to not be a significant issue. It'll blend in quite nicely and look like part of the intended ship. So it's important that as we put this in place, that we have our deck in there, because it acts as a stop to make sure that it's all aligned in the correct place. So it doesn't have to be necessarily straight, it just has to be there so that we can butt up nicely. Okay. So other areas we have to consider is the plastic parts that come around this area here, and at the front this area here. So we're going to need to get those out so that we can align the deck. The glass part that fits at the front here, mine just happens to have snapped in the process of coming off the sprue, fits very nicely. It's a good 90 degrees angle. At this end, however, where this part goes in with all these windows, the end corner, as you can see, is not square at all, and when we come to put that in, it has a problem. It's clashing with the wooden deck. So you can see that if I make that fit, it forces that out. So not having these parts in place is going to cause us a problem when we come to fit the deck. So we need to tidy this up and square this off. So that's my next job, and then we can test fit it again. So my last task on this area of deck before we can put the promenade on is just to put the replacement ladders in place. And for that I'm using these etch ladders that come from Aber. They're the correct scale, the generic, so for any ship of this scale, and actually they look really good. So that's what we're going to have to use throughout this build, where we need to replace the ladders. So my first job is just to get one set off the fret, which we're going to do now using my modified knife blade for etch, which I've just recently resharpened, so is performing really well. There we go. So that's one ladder removed. So the the critical thing here is getting the length right so that we can install it, because obviously we're having to install from the top there, which can be a little tricky. When we look at the ladders, we've got the rungs there to fold out, but before we do that, we're going to try and understand what length we need. Right, okay, so it'll go through unfolded, so that's good. So I'm just going to trim up the nubs. I've got nubs on both sides because I've actually sent some of these to Stephen for his build. I'll just cleaning the nubs off now just means it's not going to get caught on the side of that and scratch anything. Right then, we need to get the length right for these ladders. Now you can't see, but I can. We have the bulkhead on the inside, which is just on this side here. And as I run this down, I want it to run down that bulkhead, so I know I'm getting the angle of the ladders correct. That's touching the floor. So I'm going to use a little bit of masking tape now, just to mark off the top of the, there we go. So that should be my length of ladder. So what we'll do is we'll cut one rung longer than that initially, just to make sure that we're correct, and then we can trim it down. Okay, so to ensure that I don't drop this ladder in here while we just double check it, I've just wrapped a little bit of masking tape around it, which I can then hold. It's on both sides, so the ladder shouldn't come off the masking tape. I can then hold the masking tape and just dip the ladder in, and I have marked off the top of the etch underneath the masking tape there. Yeah, I'm glad we put the extra rung on because that seems about right now. So what we can do is use this to as a template for the length of the second one, and then we'll bend them once we've got the second one cut off. So, you'll see in a minute the sides of these ladders fold up, and they need to be painted in the white that we're using throughout the rest of the build. So the 71007, which also means that these ladders want priming in white as well. Okay, that's our etch put away. Okay, let's get these ladders rungs bent next. Try and show you how I fold rungs. It works for me. It seems to be an easy way of doing it. And you need the thinnest pair of tweezers you've got or can get. The usual way of getting the rungs to stick out is to just flip them with the tweezers. You sort of squeeze the tweezers together and it makes the rung flick out. But these rungs are so close together, I don't think that is going to work. So in this instance, I'm just going to push through from the back with my tweezers, and I think that is going to give me enough. There you go. So push them all through, and then we'll have a look at them and see if they need adjusting. So that one definitely does. Okay, so we need to bend those now. Possibly we should have bent them first. So that's my first set of ladders done. Having done this first set, I've now got my head around what I think is a better process. So let me show you on the second one what I think is probably the best way of putting these ladders together. I have to say, I continue to believe that Aber do the very best quality etch. It bends really well. It's a nice quality material, and I think that looks brilliant now it's done. Okay, so now, right, let's bend this second set. Now, an important thing to just point out, if you've not used photo etch before, is now we've cut this from this strip. This is very, very delicate and very easy to bend out of shape, because these two strips here on the side are only connected by these little metal tabs, so you could easily push one side up and distort the ladder, so you must be very careful with it. And the first thing we're going to do, which will add some strength to it, is just fold these side pieces in, and I'm going to use my Tamiya folding tweezers for this, because it's nice and easy. Keeps everything nice and straight and flat. And you can see that already we're getting some distortion there. You see how that the rungs are looking a little, ever so slightly twisted. If I put it on the line, you'll see we've got a little bit of distortion there. So I'm just going to very carefully straighten that up. There we go. Now, when we put the rungs in, that should make the whole thing a lot stronger. And just like before, I'm just pushing my tweezer in from the back. So I'm just going to use a little bit of frisket film to put the ladders on. It's a nice low tack film. If you're not familiar with frisket film, I have done a focus on tools video about frisket film, but it's lower tack than masking tape, so it's ideal for holding parts on that you want to paint. They won't blow off with an airbrush, but you won't get any residue when you come to take them off, so they're perfect from that point of view. So we can then just paint this up, prime it, paint it white, and then just go in with a little brush and paint the rungs in that Air Force light grey, and these ladders will be done. So painting's the next job. And hopefully we've got no bleed and it's all good, because the grey is not an easy colour to work with. We have some bleed. That's a little annoying, but there you go. Nothing we can't sort. Okay, we are now ready to put down some paint on this wooden deck and stain it, which is the area at the front of the superstructure. So as you can see, we're using some thinned enamel paint, like we did in the little practice experiment we did. And I'm going to just lay that down in the direction of the flow of the wood. And we do want it to be even, so I need to go over the edges. There we go, like so. Now, I'm not 100% sure if this deck behind this should actually still be the wood, but it's hardly going to be seen, so we're going to stain it anyway. There we go. So that's the first coat on. Because it's wood, it's going to soak up the paint fairly quickly, so we should be able to do the next two coats in fairly short order. Right, we are ready to put the promenade deck on as soon as I have got the ladders into here. So they're all painted up, ready to go. They're painted white with the rungs done in the light grey that we're using for the steel deck areas, which is been verified by some photographic evidence, so I know that's correct. So this is going to be tricky. I know it's going to be tricky. The risk of me dropping the ladder in there and it disappearing forever is quite high. So we're going to have to do this very carefully. My thought process is to lower the ladder in and then drop it against this edge here. So I'm going to put some super glue on this edge here. I'm going to put a little bit in this corner because I'm trying to put the ladder against the bulkhead. So let's see how we get on. That is in. So I'm going to do the other one off camera because that'll be the one that I drop in the hole. I didn't drop the second ladder into the hole. I do have to touch up a little bit of script, a little bit of paint off the rungs in the process of putting it on. But that's a minor thing. We can touch that up next time we're doing steel deck. So that's all good, and we are now ready to test fit the plastic deck ahead of gluing in. So there are 2 points, two of these that we need to line up with the deck, so we'll do that first. I'm going to take you out so you can see more clearly what we're doing. Okay, we can't get the whole ship in, it's just too long, so we'll put the bow in, and what we're doing is we're just lowering it in and lining it up with these deck supports. And we'll gently push it down. That's one in. And then we need to do the one at the stern here. That's a good feeling, the deck going in. Right, that's okay there. It's a little tight on this side. We just need to push the hull out a little bit and press the deck in. So it's a good tight fit actually, from that point of view. I watched a documentary yesterday about the Queen Mary 2, and it described her as a state-of-the-art ship in historical clothing, and you certainly start to get that feel when you're putting this together, and you can see where it harks back to the 60s in places and beyond. Right, so that is the deck clipped in. I'm immediately seeing that we have a gap here that we will have to sort, which is why I've not done my final white painting. The bow fits in okay, it's not perfect, and we have a gap. I really didn't want to see that we had a gap. Might be able to bring that together with a little bit of work, but the deck clicks into the hull down the main promenade really nice and tightly. It's grabbing well, and that follows through pretty much to the end of the stern. Just a small pinch in there which we might be able to sort again. So I think my thought process right now is to get some liquid poly into this section here and get that bit glued in, and then we can start working forward and then finally aft. So let's get that done. Feels like we've been working forever on areas of the ship that has just left it as an empty hull, so it's a really nice feeling to know that we're finally getting this deck on, because we can start building up from there now. I want to put some deck lights and additional bits on, so that will be what we start focusing on next once this deck's in place. Right, I'm going to carry on gluing this into place, and then we'll come back to you in a bit. Now that we've got our promenade deck fixed into place, which in the main has gone down really well, we do have a few gaps to fill at the bow end of the ship here, and we're going to tackle them in 3 different ways. So we've got some gaps here in the superstructure on each side, you can see, and they're quite a big gap, so I'm going to shim that with some plastic card and sand that down, and then if I need to, I can then go over with some filler. We've got a gap here on this curve, and I'm going to use some white squadron putty for that, because once that's dried I can shape that and that'll go down really well. And then I've got some tiny little gaps here, and you can see here, and we're going to use some Vallejo putty for that, because we can just swipe that in and job done. And then when we've done all that, we can do a last coat of the grey paint on the decks, and then we can start painting up the bits that are a bit different. We've got a little bit of photo etch to go on these. We've got the windows to glaze, the wood deck to go on. There's a little bit of etch to go on that deck as well. And then we need to do some scratch building, so we've got handrails that go all the way around here. And that all needs putting in. So yeah, we've got some bits and pieces to do in this area, so let's get cracking. I'm going to start by trying to shim up these little gaps here, and as always with gaps, they're not perfect, so we might have to tidy the gap up first. So I'm just going to go in and, using my knife, square it off, because it's actually narrower at the bottom than it is at the top. So don't be afraid of making more of a mess before you tidy things up. It often is the better way. Okay, so that sort of works like that. So let's just cut that strip as we've got it. Just using my Tamiya tweezers to quickly get that down to size. So I'm going to leave that there for a sec, and we'll have a look at the other side. That doesn't seem to have quite the same problem. It's a squarer gap. So this bit that we've just taken off, I'm going to see if we can use that to shim that side. Looks like we possibly can. Okay, so I'm happy that's shimming as much as the gap as we're going to be able to do. So we're just going to put some liquid poly in and cement that in. And while that's drying hard, it takes a little bit of time when you're using the plastic card. Dries, or appears to dry, a little bit more slowly. And then we can shape that. We need it properly dry before we can do that. So the next job we can tackle is some of these little gaps, and I'm going to use Vallejo's plastic putty. Now you get this in two different formats these days. You can get this original tube format, which comes with this handy little needle nozzle, or you can now get it in like one of their paint pots as well, and this has the advantage of it, this nozzle clogs less. What you need to do with this one periodically is just unscrew this white bit and poke it through with a bit of wire and run it through the hot tap to rinse out the putty, because it does dry a little bit on the end. But It's easy to clean up, so it's not an issue.